And we continue at 106 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
John, former Congresswoman and current candidate for Oakland Mayor Barbara Lee sat down with KRON 4, and she was asked what she would do to get Oakland out of its massive budget deficit.
So what do you see as the solution to fixing the financial problems facing the city of Oakland?
There's not one solution, quite frankly.
Well, one of the questions that she's going to have to answer is, why did you not support the recall of Sheng Tao, now that we know that the raid on her house was far more than just a raid? It was part of a process that was, well, part of a corruption investigation where the feds say she was being involved in pay to play.
She was getting bribed.
Absolutely.
And for any candidate for mayor of Oakland, I'm sure that question will be popped to them about Sheng Tao. Now, of course, there's no reason for anyone to defend Sheng Tao, but she did have her allies, and there were people who opposed the recall of her when that was being debated in the fall. But now that's said and done. She was successfully recalled from office. Oakland will have a new mayor, but the shadow of Sheng Tao will be looming over the city as it takes a while for these trials to take place. And the people of Oakland are going to have to relive the Sheng Tao administration when that trial happens. Joining us to talk about this is former Alameda County Superior Court judge who was instrumental in the effort to boot Sheng Tao from office. She realized that Sheng was up to no good for many people in Oakland did. Judge Brenda Harbin-Forte, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Now, Judge Brenda, do you feel vindicated now that the feds essentially have validated what you've been saying for years?
Yes. I guess vindicated is one description, and yes, vindicated. But I will say this: this is really a sad day for Oakland. It is unfortunate that it had to come to this, that Sheng Tao continued to engage in her corrupt activities. But what's even more sad is that so many people fell for her shenanigans. They fell for her lies. They fell for the gaslighting, and they allowed her to continue to operate as though she really were an upstanding and honest politician. And that is really, really bad.
In the press conference that was delivered earlier this morning, the feds say that they became aware of this alleged criminal activity from the Oakland Ethics Commission. Someone went to the Ethics Commission with a complaint. The Ethics Commission investigated. Someone there, I would assume, turned it over to the FBI, and that's when they launched their own independent investigation. You know the way that these things operate in a city. It's very difficult to keep a secret. If someone went to the Ethics Commission, which is appointed by politicians in Oakland, investigate, everyone in town had to know what Sheng Tao was alleged to have done. Yet, for whatever reason, as you mentioned, she had people who stood by her knowing what was out there.
Yes. And that just speaks to the whole level of corruption, that whole atmosphere of corruption in Oakland on different levels. People knew, and we brought it up in the recall, that that there were several public ethics complaints open against her that had not been investigated. Now we know that they were being investigated by the feds rather than by the Public Ethics Commission. But people knew that, and it was out in the press, and it was out during the recall. And we said that was one of the reasons that she should be recalled, because there were all of these allegations, and allegations made by very credible people, that she had engaged in all kinds of illegal activities. You may remember Renea Webb, her former chief of staff, she had gone public with the allegations about Chang violating ethics rules and having people work on her campaign, for example, on work time. Leanna Powell, also a former employee of Shane Tao, quit. Actually, she ended up getting fired because she objected to having to campaign for Shane Tao on city time. So there were all of these things that were going on, and we kept trying to tell people that this is the reason she needed to be recalled. And they attacked us. They turned on us and made all kinds of false allegations against the recallers. We were, by the way,
go ahead. No, go ahead and finish your point.
With this right-wing conspiracy trying to go after this poor innocent mayor, a woman of color, and she's saying she was poor, and if she'd been rich, she would not have been subjected to these kinds of allegations. I mean, just gaslighting, just disgusting, quite frankly.
When the raid happened, Shang gave that famous press conference where she was very defiant. And she said since then, after that press conference and a number of television interviews, which you and I have talked about, when she said things that an attorney probably would wish she shouldn't have said, she made a number of claims, including that the feds told her that she was not the target of the investigation and that she was essentially has already been cleared in whatever it was that they were investigating. That obviously is not true. But she seemed to genuinely believe it when she would go out and say these things. What do you think was the motivation for her to do that? Do you think that someone led her astray? Do you think that she's so dense she couldn't connect the dots? Or do you think that she was just so used to lying that it's just second nature?
I think it's the latter. She was just so used to misleading people and putting out false information and misinformation. And again, unfortunately, a lot of people fell for that. Now, I used to practice criminal defense in federal courts, and I've clerked on the Federal Court of Appeals, so saw a lot of criminal cases in the federal system. Also had represented people who'd been indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office before I went on the state court bench. So the feds don't have an obligation to tell you whether or not you are a target unless they're inviting you to testify before the grand jury. So they're not going to tell you that. And if they're investigating others, they are not going to tip their hands. And we tried to tell people that on the campaign trail when we were pushing for the recall. That's not truthful. And then sometimes you might notice that she would be sort of cagey in the sense that she would say, well, they haven't told me that I am a target. And that's a little bit different from saying they haven't told me I'm not a target. So she was playing games. There would be all these word salads that she would have out to try, and then she'd throw in a few tears to try to make herself sound credible. But people who know how the federal system operates and how federal investigations go didn't buy that for 1 minute. But she kept saying it. So that's her standard operating procedure. And as I said, she just accused she took no responsibility for anything that had happened, and she just kept trying to deflect and blame other people for her troubles.
We're speaking with Judge Brenda Harbin-Forte, a former Alameda Superior Court judge. One of her defenses when she went on that publicity tour after the raid was essentially, I didn't do anything that everyone else hasn't already done. It's my turn now. Why do you have an objection to me doing what everyone else has been doing? And I guess the supposition was, well, go look at Libby Schaaf, the previous mayor of Oakland. She was doing the same thing I'm doing. Why do you have a beef with me? If that's the position that you take, and you may not know what's legal and what's illegal, you may take a bunch of people down with you without even knowing that's what you're about to do. How nervous are other politicians in her orbit right now that in an effort to save herself, she's going to knowingly or unknowingly throw them all under the bus too?
I think there are a lot of people who have been losing a lot of sleep for months now. Rumor had it that indictments were going to be coming down sometime after the November election anyway. But once this investigation started and when the subpoenas, when the search warrants were served, then a lot of people lost sleep. A lot of people in local government, people who had gone to Vietnam on that trip, lost a lot of sleep. So they all ought to be very, very nervous. They all ought to be wondering whether or not they are going to be indicted as well. The investigation is still ongoing, and you saw that the San Leandro City Council person's home was raided a few days ago. The investigation is still going on, so I expect some additional indictments sometime soon. There is a change in administration on the federal side. We don't know if Izzy Ramsey is going to remain as the U.S. Attorney for Northern District. There may be a change in that. Often presidents will put in new people in various city attorney leadership roles. And various U.S. attorney leadership roles. But I think that the feds are still going to go hard. Public corruption is still going to be a big thing. It will be particularly a big thing in Oakland because of the allegations, and also because Oakland in particular and California in general is not held in high esteem by the incoming administration anyway. So I expect that the feds are going to go hard against anyone who may be caught up in this. So there will be other search warrants issued. There will be other raids. There will be more charges coming, and people should lawyer up. They should already start trying to look at some getting a good defense attorney, because there are other people. I just think that there are other people that will go down as well before this is all over with. And I do think that Sheng Tao is going to she's going to turn on some people, and she will turn them in. She will try to save her own self. She'll try to save her own skin. And we already know, you can tell from the indictment that apparently there are phone calls that have been taped, and so somebody has already been providing information, and that somebody other than Renea Webb, we know, gave information to the feds. But the indictment mentions phone calls that apparently were recorded. So you already had somebody working and being, I don't want to say a snitch, but being an informant, someone who's already being an informant throughout this investigation. So a lot more is going to be disclosed.
You know, back in the old days, if you were part of the mafia, if you were part of the mob, you didn't even acknowledge that the mob existed. And then they started making movies about it. They made The Godfather. They made some of the others. And it became something that became culturally popular. And you look at the evolution of these mob families over time, and instead of denying that the mob exists, they embrace it. And their kids are Instagram influencers, and their grandkids are Instagram influencers, and they have reality TV shows, and they're guests on the talk shows. Victoria Gotti, I think, at one point was the editor of Star Magazine. But it's not something that they run away from anymore. It's something that they own and that they use for cultural cachet. The same thing could be true for the drug cartels, where they make movies and television programs about El Chapo and El Mayo and all of these other big players in that world, and their kids, again, Instagram influencers and essentially celebrities of sorts. You look at the family that's associated with Sheng Tao in this investigation, Cal Waste Solutions, the Dong family, Andy specifically. He is like one of those mob kids or one of those cartel kids where he has the power, he has the influence, and he wants everyone to know that he is Mr. in the know and Mr. at every sporting event, concert, political event, whatever. He's the guy who's got access to all the bold-faced names, and he takes selfies with them and puts it all over social media. I'm sure the feds are combing through his social media accounts, all the photographs that he's posted, all the dates and timestamps on those photographs. And one person who shows up in these photographs quite frequently is the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta, who before he was appointed to be Attorney General was the assemblyman representing Oakland and the East Bay. I wonder if he's one of the ones who's quite nervous today.
If I were a betting woman, I would say yes. He is assuredly very, very nervous right now.
And you can never tell, because sometimes these people are gadflies. Sometimes there are gadflies who can talk their way into any room, and you think, oh my God, look at this person. They know senators, and they know congressmen, and they know different mayors and governors, and they really have no power and influence. This guy is not a gadfly. This guy is someone whose calls are taken, who can get anyone he wants on the telephone. This guy is someone that they pay attention to.
Right. And I will say that with respect to other people who should be nervous, of course, there's no crime in being associated with people who are engaging in criminal activity. And it appears that the Duongs did spread their money around. They even donated to Trump's campaign. So they spread their money around because they wanted influence in various circles. So it may not be that there's anything there, and or at least not enough to connect the dots for some criminal prosecution, just because people have pictures taken with the Duong family. But there is enough to investigate and to see if there is something, because when you see the pattern and you see how the money was spread around and you see the influence that was brought, a la what is happening with the Sheng criminal prosecution, there is enough, again, for people to be worried about. They ought to be worried, and I'm sure they're rethinking some conversations that they have had that might have been recorded. They are thinking about transactions. They're thinking about meetings. They are thinking about a lot of gatherings where conversations might have been had, and all of that information might come to light.
Last question before you go. We know that the feds have alleged that Sheng Tao participated in illegal activity. They also allege that her boyfriend was one of her co-conspirators, was also involved in participating in these illegal acts. Sometimes couples stay together when they've been accused of a crime. They defend one another. They back each other's stories up. They stick together. They stay married. Sometimes they turn on one another. We know that there have been allegations that Sheng was essentially an abused spouse. I know at her inauguration, her former chief of staff said that she was verbally berated by her boyfriend in front of some of her staff members, including junior staff members, and it was highly embarrassing for her. Do you think those two are going to stay together, or do you think they're going to turn on one another?
I don't know. That's hard to speculate about. It would not surprise me if they stayed together. That would not surprise me at all. But and that sometimes for a battered spouse, a battered partner, that's part of the problem, that you will stay and you'll continue to take the abuse. So it's very hard to speculate. I think that I think there are going to be discussions of a lot of plea agreements to be negotiated, and that there is going to be a lot of information that is given up. It may be that Andre turns on some other people as well. So you just never know what might happen. So I really don't want to speculate as to what they may do, whether they'll stay together or not.
Judge Brenda Harbin-Forte, former Alameda Superior Court judge, she was on the Shangtao before many in Oakland or elsewhere was a leading voice in the recall campaign against Shangtao. That campaign, of course, was successful and then vindicated yesterday when the feds announced, or I guess today they made the announcement official, that they were in fact going to be charging former Oakland Mayor Shangtao with federal offenses. Judge Brenda Harbin-Forte, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, if you want to listen to us all weekend long, that's easy to do.
All you got to do is go to KABC.com, click on podcasts, go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You can download all the episodes. You can do a Google on the YouTube or get that handy-dandy KABC app. Search KABC AM in the Apple App Store, the Android Store. It's the easiest way to listen live to this radio station and download all the podcasts. So whether it's a Saturday or a Sunday, you can pretend that it's
And Randy, we're on the move in the San Francisco Bay.
We do a version of the Fix California Hour weeknights at 11 on KSFO in the Bay Area. KSFO just moved from AM 560 to AM 810. That's a bigger, stronger signal that you can even hear at night crystal clear down here in Southern California. So set a preset for AM 810 right next to 790. And if it's 11 o'clock at night, listen to us.
One of the things that people watch the Super Bowl for outside of the actual game itself is the halftime show. Another popular feature of the Super Bowl are the ads. People want to see what products are being sold and what celebrities will be appearing in those ads, those sorts of things. However, Randy, the news now is not what ad you're going to see. The news now is what ad you're not going to see.
That's because major insurer State Farm, who usually has a big Super Bowl ad, they had a huge one last year with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it. They had already bought time to feature yet another big Super Bowl ad. However, I don't think anybody wants to see a company like State Farm that dropped 70,000 policies last year in California, including in the Palisades, which means people had to go on the FAIR plan before the Palisades burned down. They don't want to see that company wasting a whole bunch of money on a Super Bowl ad.
It's a bad look, as they say.
For more, here's a report from Inside Edition and Jim Murray.
There's been anger during the LA fires at State Farm Insurance after it was revealed that last year it had dropped policies for a large number of California property owners. Now comes this. State Farm just canceled its planned Super Bowl commercial, a follow-up to last year's ad featuring
I think Arnold still gets paid either way.
Featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito that was voted most popular.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Oh, God.
How much do you think he commands for an ad these days?
Oh, for an ad like that, we're talking millions. By the way, have you noticed that the older Arnold gets, the more he sounds like somebody doing an impression of Arnold?
I think we all get there at a certain point.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Stop whining.
Cut. State Farm has just announced it's pulled its new Super Bowl commercial due to the devastating Los Angeles fires.
You know what also wasn't a very good look? The fires were so devastating that the big Rams playoff game had to be moved from Los Angeles because it was so awful. And so they moved that game to the Cardinals Stadium in Arizona, which is sponsored by State Farm.
I wonder why they didn't just move it to a stadium in the Southern California region so the Rams fans could go. You could move it to Anaheim. You could move it to San Diego.
Could have moved it to Vegas.
Last year's commercial was a huge hit with viewers, featuring actors Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I don't know if I'd say huge hit. I think the biggest reaction you get these days out of a Super Bowl commercial is, oh, I know that guy. Oh, that's pretty cool.
Oh, I saw that movie in the 80s.
Yeah. Nobody's like, oh, that was so great. I need to see that again. Like, do hacky morning shows still do the day after the Super Bowl? Here's all the ads on the radio.
I'm sure they do.
who plays an insurance agent saving pets from a family's home that's going up in flames.
That would be tasteless.
Could you imagine if they actually played that?
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Today,
Oh, poor Danny. He didn't want to be associated with this.
I wonder if he divorced Rhea before he got cashed in his money from State Farm.
today, State Farm.
Now, Randy, before I get back to the ex-wife of Danny DeVito, what country was it that Karen Bass went to when the fires broke out?
Ghana.
Rhea Perlman used to be married to Danny DeVito. What country was it that Karen Bass went to when the fires broke out?
Ghana.
Rhea Perlman is now single.
Today, State Farm announced our focus is firmly on providing support to the people of Los Angeles. We will not.
You mean the people that you dropped?
A whole lot of them.
All the non-renewals? In order to play chicken with Ricardo Lara so you could get your way and get better rate hikes?
We will not be advertising during the game as originally planned. The insurance giant faced criticism last year after it declined to renew 72,000 policies in California due to the wildfire risk. It now says it will offer policy renewals to thousands of people impacted by the fires.
You mean you're going to renew their policy for their burned-up plot of land? Well, now that we're not going to pay you for the value of the home that was on the land, now that the land is worth nothing because there's a bunch of debris on it, we'd love to insure you.
Yeah, now they can be generous.
Today, there's a new threat in fire-ravaged Los Angeles. This hillside home survived the devastating Pacific Palisades fire, only to be split in half by a landslide.
It's just devastation after devastation every day with this.
Yeah, no kidding.
Incredibly, the house made it through the fire, but now has been completely destroyed by a landslide, possibly triggered by the house above it, which burned and then collapsed in the fire.
We're unfortunately at a point where even though we're starting to really get a good handle on both the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire, the first time it rains this season, it's going to be a disaster.
Oh, can you imagine with the movement of the land what you're going to see?
I'm sickened, because we had survived the fires and we were so holding on to the hope that we could move back in.
Today, authorities warned expect more landslides along devastated hillsides.
A warning to all the residents, no matter where you live in LA County, if you have...
I know that guy sounds like Mayor Pete, but it's not Mayor Pete. He works for Public Works.
Every so often, you find someone who sounds exactly like a famous person, and you can't get it out of your head once you make the connection.
If you have slopes behind your homes, or if you're...
You know who was like that?
Who's like that?
Joe Lieberman and the guy who played the dad on Alf.
Or if you're located on the top of a slope, these slopes have become fragile.
Frustration continues to grow among fire evacuees not allowed access to their homes.
I live right here. Just when I go to my house.
They would just like to see if they got robbed.
Well, isn't the fake doctor saying she has to investigate before you can go back and take a look at your house? She's real busy.
She's got to take some samples of all the debris to see how toxic it is.
No, thank you.
And I just read a report today. Part of the reason that the debris fields are so toxic is because a neighborhood like the Palisade had a lot of Teslas. And when the lithium batteries melt, there's a lot of chemicals.
If the fake doctor showed up to my house before I was allowed back and took samples from my property, it would feel so violating.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't let anybody through. It's a hard closure. If I burn down, it's okay. I'm fine with that. Why is that a no?
Actor Mel Gibson was one of the few homeowners able to catch a ride in with firefighters to view his once sprawling Malibu estate.
Wow. So if you're famous, you can see your home?
That's pretty much how it works in this town for everything.
Wow.
Today, nothing remains of the $18 million property.
This was a garage and a guest house apartment on top.
He toured the scorched grounds with News Nation senior national correspondent Brian Enton.
I'm sorry.
There we go. There's State Farm pulling out their Super Bowl ad and a bunch of other fire news.
Well, it's a smart move because if they played that ad with that content under these circumstances, everyone would turn on the Terminator.
I also think they got to change their spokes line. They're not like a good neighbor anymore.
No.
They left town.
No, it's like living next to the Munsters. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Roger writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com and says, so the NFL team formerly from St. Louis played in the stadium of the NFL team formerly from St. Louis.
And the game wasn't in St. Louis.
Nope.
Maybe that's where they should have put it. Well, it's Jimmy Buffett Friday. The weekend is quickly approaching. And I don't know what the deal is, Randy. I know that 2025 has just started. But doesn't it feel like 2025 has been going on like 6 months?
This has been the longest 2 weeks ever.
Usually it's the opposite. Usually say, can you believe it's March already? I mean, I just blinked and it was Christmas. Not this year.
These last 2 weeks have felt like 3 months.
And it's all fire talk. And now apparently, did you see it's going to be freezing in Washington? So there are all kinds of changes being made to the inauguration.
It's going indoors. And all the people that want to go watch can go watch at the basketball arena.
Do you think it's legitimately due to the weather, or do you think because there have been 2 assassination attempts on President-elect Trump, and both of those attempts occurred outdoors, once at a rally in Pennsylvania, once on the golf course in Florida, that they just don't want to take any chances, and that's why they're putting it indoors?
I think it could be a little of both, but it's supposed to be a high of 25 Monday in D.C. and a low of 10.
There was one president who was inaugurated in Washington, D.C. on a very, very, very cold day. And he gave one of these Fidel Castro-esque speeches that just went on forever. And the guy caught his death of cold and was dead like a week later.
William Henry Harrison, only president for 37 days.
Yeah, well, had he had an editor, he would have been alive. So you don't want to be out in the cold too long if you don't have to. And I'll tell you, seeing stories like that helps you realize why we put up with all the insanity that we put up with here. Because if you want to be lazy and you want to go outside without wearing a coat, you can do that here. You do that when it's 20 degrees outside, guess what? Your nipples can cut glass.
Oh, and it's supposed to snow the night before, so, yeah, it might be weather-related.
What's the longest you've ever been outside the state of California in your life?
2 weeks in Santa Fe in the winter, this Christmas.
I spent a month in the state of Florida once, and that was the longest I've ever been. And I think it was actually 30 days. I don't even think it was 31. So I don't think I've ever been outside the state of California for longer than 30 days. And going to Florida during the summer isn't exactly braving the freezing weather. I'm just not built for that kind of weather.
I'm not built for it. In Santa Fe, I like it because I can control it, and the house that I stay in is very well insulated, and I like wearing a coat and have all my cashmere. But I got to imagine living with that could get real old real fast.
I forget which age it was. When I hit a certain age, I know people like to say, oh, let's go on vacation. We'll do a summer vacation this year. We'll go someplace warm, and then we'll do a winter vacation in the mountains, and we'll go someplace cold. And I finally got to the point where I said to myself, you hate the cold. Stop saying yes. All right, we've got one more hour coming up on the John Phillips Show right here on Talk Radio 790 KABC.